Well, welcome back to the shop, everybody. It's so good to have you here with me today. Today's a big day because we're covering the miter saw. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the different types of saws and their parts. We're going to be covering some safety items as well as some maintenance. And then we're going to wrap this whole video up with covering the 5 most common types of cuts that this saw can make. Thanks for joining me. There are 3 saws in the market today. The first one I'm going to cover is the one I have right here. This is the sliding compound miter saw. Now this saw kind of does it all. It crosscuts, it miters, it bevels, and it also slides, giving me the ability to cut wider boards. From there is the compound saw, which basically is this saw without the sliding option. It still crosscuts, miters, and bevels, and that's pretty much the most common saw out there in the market. From there is the conventional saw, and this saw only crosscuts and only miters. The 2 most common sizes of saws on the market are the 10 and the 12-inch saw. Now, the 10 and the 12 represent basically the diameter of the saw blade itself. So generally speaking, the 12-inch saw can cut bigger, wider boards. So now that we've covered all of these saws and what they can do, the question is, do you really need a saw that does it all? No, of course not. Most people would be completely happy and satisfied with a 10-inch compound miter saw. But I do, however, recommend that you do not buy a conventional saw. For a few more bucks, you can get a compound saw, and you'll be very, very glad that you did. Moving on to the parts of the miter saw, we first have the saw blade, fence, the table, the scale indicator, the side handle, lower guard, handle, motor, and dust port. Let's talk a little bit about safety. Be sure to read and understand the manuals that come with your saw. And second, make sure that you're wearing safety glasses and using some sort of dust collection system or the bag that comes with the saw. These saws love to spray sawdust and chunks of wood everywhere. Trust me, catching a piece of oak in the eye is not a joyous thing. And then lastly, be sure to support your workpiece on either end if it's longer than the saw table itself. So let's talk quickly about maintenance. These saws really don't require a lot from you, but one of the first things that you want to do is actually get the saw and verify that the positive stops are accurate, meaning that when you set it to a 45 degree, that the scale itself and the cut is actually 45 degrees. And you're going to want to check this more often, especially if you're traveling with this unit, because if it gets banged around, the scale can get off and your measurements can get off. Now the manual does a fantastic job of helping you make those adjustments. The other thing that some of these saws require some lubricant, so be sure to be doing that on a regular basis if your saw needs it, and as well as keeping a sharp blade. Keeping a sharp blade is definitely part of the maintenance, and it makes all the difference in the quality of your work and the safety while using it. And lastly, periodically remove sawdust and wood chips from around all the moving parts so that the saw can move freely and work safely. Alright, so let's move on to the 5 most common types of cuts. I'm going to show you each one, then I'm going to give you some tips and tricks along the way. Here you can see 4 different types of cuts: the crosscut, the miter cut, the bevel cut, and the compound cut. And the 5th type of cut that we're going to be talking about is a repetitive cut, one that you do often. Now that type of cut or setup can be used with almost any cut that this miter saw can do. More on that in a few minutes. Starting with the most simple cut, the crosscut. It's a simple cut, but one that you're going to be using this saw for often. The basic motion is to lay your workpiece flat, tight to the fence. Use the clamp that comes with the saw if you have it, or use your hands. Just make sure you keep your hands free from the rotation of the blade. Once you're ready, start the saw, allow the blade to get up to full speed, and then lower the saw into the material. From a safety standpoint, you should always wait for the blade to come to a full stop before removing your workpiece. The first trick I want to mention to you is actually helping you to cut boards that are wider than what your saw can actually cut. Meaning when you have a board like this one where it's just a little bit wider than what you can get through, all you need to do is lift the board slowly, keeping it tight to the fence, then which allows you then to cut off that remaining bit. The other tip I want to mention to you also is that how to cut bowed boards. The thing to remember is always cut with the bowed side facing you like this, which allows the center of the board to actually be tight to the fence. If it's the other way around, then the center board is not tight, leaving a gap between the workpiece and the fence, which creates some serious problems when trying to cut it. Remember, the board always needs to be tight to the fence in order to be safe. Next is the miter cut. The miter cut is used for door and window casing or picture frames, really any material that needs to come together at an angle. For this example, we are joining two pieces together at a 45 to make a 90. Swing your miter handle, lock it at 45 degrees, place your board tight to the fence and table, start the saw, and make your cut. The tip that I have for cutting miters is a little technique that I like to call like sneaking up to the line. So when you're cutting a 45-degree angle, it sometimes can be hard to tell where the blade is going to end up once the cut is done. Is it going to hit your mark or is it going to be off? So what I do is I make a cut, stay away from the line just a little bit, so that once the cut's done I can see where it is, and then I can slowly sneak up to the line so I don't overcut. Next up is the bevel cut. The bevel cut is used for baseboard or really any other materials that need to come together at a particular angle. Here we have a piece of baseboard, and we're cutting them both at a 45-degree bevel so that they will come together in an inside corner. To make the bevel cut, you first have to loosen the bevel handle and tip the head to 45 degrees. Once tightened though, place the board down tight to the fence and slowly make your cut. Bevel cuts can be tricky, especially when the board gets really wide. So the tip I have for you to make sure that your cuts stay really 90 degrees to your board is to make sure that they're clamped down tight. And when you're making the bevel cut, it's such a steep angle, and if the board's wide enough, it wants to actually push the board away from you as you're cutting. So in order to make really good bevel cuts on wide boards, be sure that you're clamping the board down securely. Next is the most complicated of all these cuts, which is the compound cut. The compound cut includes a miter and a bevel all in one, and you see this most often in crown molding. For this cut, you need to adjust your miter angle and then your bevel angle, hold the material tight, and make the cut. And last but not least, the repetitive cut. Like I said in the beginning of the video, the miter saw is a master at making quick repetitive cuts. But in order to do them quickly, you have to eliminate the one thing that takes the most time to make the cut, and that is measuring each piece. For example, if I need to make 20 pieces at 4 inches, it would be well worth my time not to measure each one, but to set up a stop block. Measure from the blade to the edge of a block, 4 inches, clamp that wood in place, and now all you have to do is slide your board tight to the stop block and make your cut. A tip I'd offer on this one is to make a small 45-degree cut at the bottom of the stop block so the sawdust does not build up and affect your measurements by holding the wood away from your stop block. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. I think we covered a lot today. We talked about the different types of saws, sizes, and their parts. We talked about safety. We talked about maintenance. And we just covered the 5 most common types of cuts, as well as some tips and tricks. It was a bunch. So I encourage you to go back, rewatch the video now, but this time do it with your miter saw so we can be making the cuts together. Thanks for watching today. If you have any comments or questions, leave them below. Like, subscribe to the channel, and until we see each other again, be well and stay safe.